Let's talk Cyberpunk. What up, viewers? What up? What up? I am starting a new show where we talk about video games once a month. So, welcome to the Friend Zone. And this month we will be talking about Cyberpunk 2077. So, let's talk. What up, everybody? Everybody, please go around. Let's introduce everybody. Everybody knows me, Calc Soups. But for everybody else on this, go around and introduce yourselves.
I'll go first. I'm Hemsley. I am probably the biggest nerd here. Mostly because I do a little bit of everything: LARP, D&D, programming, you name it. I dabble in it. So that gives me exactly zero qualifications to talk about this game like I know anything. But I'll pretend otherwise because it's the internet and that's what we do here.
Yes, yes. We need nerds. We need more nerds talking about stuff.
Alrighty, I guess I'm up. I'm Josh. I have a some of a professional background in game development, so I could maybe able to talk about that to some degree. And yeah, just here to chat about some video games.
Sounds good.
I'm George, go by Sens Online. I work in accounting and finance. I've been in games for a decade. Play a lot of stuff for a lot of time. So, I don't know. Not really qualifications, but,
Well, no, that's good enough. Thank you all for
enough.
being here. Really appreciate it. And let's jump in, start talking about some Cyberpunk. So I don't think anybody can talk about Cyberpunk. We got to start at the beginning with kind of the lead up to launch, kind of the anticipation of the game. We saw that one teaser trailer, 30-second teaser trailer in 2012, just to kind of start the whole hype train. But yeah, let's just kind of talk about all of that stuff, just the lead up to launch, everything kind of pre-launch, what we all kind of thought of that.
So I'm a bit of an anomaly because I basically saw what we now know is like the all foods, one of the intro parts of Cyberpunk, that whole like immersive thing, at E3, the one that they were very explicit, like, this is not a demonstration of the final product. Please don't get hyped about this.
Yeah.
But I saw that, and then I honestly just pre-ordered it the moment that it was available and stopped paying any attention to the game for the duration of 2020. So I went in with zero expectations and zero hype, and I think that honestly colored my opinion of this game as I played through it.
Yeah, I mean I saw both of I saw like the last 2 years, kind of the BCD stuff, the last two times that E3 was held. So I'd kind of seen little snippets of it along the way, and everything that was ever at E3, like 3 months later, they would kind of show off at like Gamescom or something like that. So I never saw anything. I just saw it a little early. I don't think I saw anything that anybody else didn't see or anything like that. And the game looked fine and good up until that point. So I know that those were always kind of like really exclusive things to see at E3, but I thought the kind of marketing material was really cool. But yeah, 8 years was quite a long time. I remember the kind of like tweet that kind of brought them back of like, I think they just said beep, like like the Cyberpunk account just said beep, and then they're like, oh hey, we're back. It's 2016. We haven't seen anything in like 5 or 6 years. Let's start the hype train up again.
And I think it's funny too because that runs around when the next console generation was like probably thoroughly starting to get into people's minds, and I think that as I'm sure we'll talk about, huge impact on this game.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, and so yeah, George, if you have anything on kind of the anticipation lead up to the game.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I don't. I'm not familiar with Cyberpunk as an IP. I mean, I know Shadowrun more, I think. So
That
the
is
IP, yeah, I mean the IP itself, I don't care. That wasn't a driver for me. It was more that I had played The Witcher for hundreds of hours. It's so good.
Yeah.
That it's like, okay, this is their next IP they're doing. It's the sort of you know, sci-fi future instead of the medieval past type thing. But that's just a setting to me.
Yeah.
It's just everything about The Witcher. You kind of expect, all right, they're going to take all those ideas and just put them into a different world, and so it's like that's what I want. So it was definitely a hyped game purely because of what CD Projekt had brought to Witcher. I think for me.
Yeah. I mean, we don't have to take too much time talking about just the series of delays and kind of the anticipation leading up to it. But if anybody has any thoughts on just them being delayed so much and the kind of red flags that might have come along with those series of delays and each, yeah.
I mean, if we want to talk about red flags, let's. I mean, I think it's hard to ignore 8 years in some kind of development. Starting from an announcement to the 2020 cluster.
Yeah.
I mean, as far as my interest in Cyberpunk, just like George here, I'm not as interested in the IP. Most of my interest really revolved around the development of the game and uh, its implosion. And I think I have the same sort of morbid curiosity when it comes to Star Citizen, another game that I am just like sitting there with the popcorn every time I hear that things are just like just going in this bizarre direction. I think just because we're so used to the structure of AAA game development and sort of now we as consumers we know what to expect. As a developer, I know what to expect if I'm working at a studio that has a game in the pipeline. But then it's these independent studios that things can start to fly off the rails. And I mean, I gotta say, like, I'm like, when it comes to development stuff, I'm totally rubbernecker. Like, I'm just like cruising down. And I hear some news about crash and burn, and I'm just like, oh my god, like, what were people thinking? How did things go so wrong? And I start to go down the rabbit hole, and it just like totally sucks me into that drama.
Yeah.
And Cyberpunk is like the epitome of super. It's as almost as big of an independent developer as you can get to watch something just like completely implode and crash and burn.
Yeah.
And I'm there for the show. I want to see it burn down and watch the coals. And so yeah, I mean, I think in a nutshell, 8 years of development screams of problems, like
Yeah.
anything from mismanagement to money issues to developer issues to ideas completely transforming and requiring rebuilds, and then you take so long to finally get to some point where you have something that could become a game, and now you're onto another hardware generation. You have to completely rebuild your engine, the whole shebang.
Yep. Yeah, I think the, I think one of the delays, like there was the rumor mill started up, and it was completely blaming like old gen hardware, and it was like, I think it even got specific enough to say like it was the original Xbox, and it was like, yeah, it just it was just like, of course it's not going to be able to, like, this game was developed on PC for 8 years, and like, I don't know how much. I mean, obviously they've had deals and all that kind of stuff going forward with like the platformers the platform publishers that they had to bring it out on, cross platform. But so when people say like, oh, they should have just brought it out on next gen only, it's like, I think there's two sides to that, like, because they're definitely, the platform holders want games on their old systems as well as their new systems. So
I mean, I guess since I build forecasts for these things, that's my job. I get the financial side of the development process. You can't support the P&L for the game without having the the forecast of the units you're going to sell. And if you cut
Yeah.
out the current gen systems, you lose like millions of units, and
Yeah.
then you can't afford to build the game.
Yeah.
But
Um,
but is it fair to base it off of presumed sales on last gen consoles that may not exist?
it may have been at the time. Once they delayed the game, then you end up in a real problem, because the further you get away from the current gen timing, right, the less you should be relying on those sales, especially, I mean, we'll talk about it, but obviously because it doesn't really work on current gen.
Yeah.
No, absolutely.
If
Yeah.
you just go next gen when next gen launches, the adoption takes time, and so they're not able to sell as many units on only next gen. And so you have to look at the whole P&L, and if they've been in development for 8 years, how much does that cost? Can you recover that cost if you only go next gen and PC and you lose all those current gen players?
Yeah.
And my guess is they, as a company, looked at those financials and said that that's impossible. Like we can't do that. We have to launch right now.
Yeah.
And so, like, a delay on its own doesn't really concern me. If anything, it tells me that there are bugs in the game. They need to fix them before they launch. That's good.
Yep.
Having multiple delays is bad.
Yeah.
Well, it
And
feels
certainly in this instance where the devs, it sound like they didn't even think they would release for another 2 years based on where they were at in the game.
Cool.
And see, that's a problem to me. And it's
Yes.
indicative of everything that's wrong with Cyberpunk. And it's that Cyberpunk is weird to me. Like, I've been trying to summarize it. The phrase "more than the sum of its parts" is the opposite of Cyberpunk. Cyberpunk has very good individual moments, but overall it is not like that solid of a game, to the extent that it's not a good Cyberpunk game. I know that you guys were talking about earlier that you weren't really big into it, but I am. I'm a huge Cyberpunk genre. I actually did not play most of the Witcher games. I'm not that big of a fan of the mechanics, so I just never got into it. I like the setting, but I'm a world builder, so I first and foremost care about the story that's being delivered.
Yep.
And Cyberpunk 2077 is not a good Cyberpunk game, and that, to me, supersedes every. Because then, what's the point of making the game? Why are we here in the first place? If you can't deliver on your core premise, then why are we here?
Yep.
Cool. So all right, we've got a couple red flags. We saw a couple, things up at the. I don't want to brush the kind of crunch stuff under the rug. If we have any kind of thoughts, we want to spend a couple minutes on that whole controversy as well. We can definitely talk about that, or we can kind of get to actual gameplay if we want.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I could say to crunch. I mean, working in the industry for a long time, every studio crunches. It's a fact.
Yep.
You can argue whether that's fair or not. I've been working for 20 years, 10 in games, and I've done my share of overtime, mostly unpaid, right? I don't get overtime pay for any work ever because I'm an accountant and we're exempt. But I see the workers, and most of them, I would say if they're really invested in the game, they don't actually mind working the extra hours, in that they're very invested in it. It's a passion project for them.
Yep.
It's usually, I'd say like the QA departments and stuff that get worked super hard.
Yeah.
To squash the bugs, and they're not as invested in it because to them it's a job. It's not their passion project, like the designers, the engineers, some of those guys.
Yeah.
So it does vary on like where you are in the business, what your opinion of crunch is. It also matters in a game like this where they were probably in crunch for years. Crunch should be like, we've got a sprint to get this thing out in 3 months. Like we better crunch and make sure this is done.
Yep.
It's when you crunch and then you run into problems and you continue to crunch and continue to crunch, and then it just overwhelms your staff and your morale goes down.
Yep.
And honestly, it's, to me, crunch has always been indicative of a problem that I feel like we as gamers, and I put this on us as like a group, because I think that it's a conversation that never happens. It's not even expectations. How are we supposed to expect video game companies to continue making money if we're expecting them to charge the same amount for their product as they've done for the last 3 years?
Yes.
Like, we refuse any form of monetization when they try, but there's no like alternative, right? No one's going to pay $100 for a video game, except for Australia, but we'll get to that.
For Canada.
So like, or subscription model. Like, everyone has outrage over every monetization, but at the end of the day, part of the reason I feel like crunch happens, part of the reason that we get these rush jobs, is because businesses are beholden to their stockholders, and at the end of the day, the numbers need to go up. And I think that's a totally reasonable expectation to have. The problem is no one's starting the conversation of like, okay, this needs to happen. What are we willing to do? How do I fund this so that this can continue to happen? And that's kind of what I've been toying around with a lot in my spare time, is like, what is a fundamentally different model that the video game industry needs to adopt, because I don't think it can continue how it's existing.
Yeah.
The next so with next gen launching, the look from all of the major players is that games are going to be $70 now instead of
Yep.
60.
Absolutely.
So it's good that this is the first time we've actually had a price increase on the games in, I don't even
a
know,
decade.
is it two cycles now?
It's
Two
yes.
full
It
generations?
was
While.
two console generations. Yeah.
Yeah.
It should have
It
happened
should.
last time.
It should have.
With the jump from PS3 to PS4.
And this goes back to the whole concept of, when you forecast out the game, financials, you base it on units, and you know what those units cost.
Yeah.
And if you can't figure out a way to squeeze in more units, if you can change the price, that can really balance out the P&L so that you actually have a viable product.
Yep.
And so having a $10 increase makes a big difference.
Yep.
Um,
Yeah. I mean,
And
that's
part of it-
it's season pass proliferation and all that kind of stuff like that.
Right, which
Yeah.
I think are fine, to be honest. I have no
and
problem
this
with
is-
Season Pass.
yeah, this isn't Cyberpunk specific, but obviously games as a service is a newer concept, and it works for some games and it doesn't work for other games. But the whole process for it is trying to figure out if you don't think you can sell enough units up front, but you can extend the revenue streams into the future through digital revenue, then your P&L can work, and then your
Yeah.
game can be released.
Yep.
All right. If you design every game as just a standalone product, I sell it, it's done. You have to make the P&L work through units. If you can say, but I'm going to release some stuff later, whether it's more missions, more cosmetics, those revenue items can sustain the P&L for the base game. And I think gamers as a whole just think that we are designing these games as a service as schemes to print money.
Yeah.
But it's very different if you're a Fortnite and the whole economy of the game is based off of cosmetics.
Yeah.
Versus some of these more tailored experiences, that these are incredibly expensive games to make.
Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah, and it shouldn't cost the same amount.
Yeah.
It doesn't now, but there is a world that you can look back to because of the nature of technology and video games, where things like, I mean, something like Detroit 2 Human, right, which should be something that we celebrate, but we can't because of like the weird niche that it falls into, even though
Yeah.
that game is phenomenal in what it had tried to accomplish, right? Did
Yeah.
it succeed? Different conversation.
Sure.
But we should celebrate that artistic exploration of video gaming as a medium. But we can't, because artistic exploration in money have to go hand in hand with this type of
Yeah.
industry. And
Yeah.
like that's a conversation that just doesn't happen.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's also, this is one of the reasons that you rarely will see MMO games now.
Yeah.
Right, World of Warcraft is its own animal, but it building curated content that players can consume is very expensive.
Yeah.
And gamers, as we've seen, can consume content at an alarmingly fast rate.
Yeah.
So
Cool.
when you have a Fortnite game or a Warzone game,
Yeah.
you build one map and people play on it for hundreds of hours, and there's no changes that you need to do. It's all because it's a PvP game.
Yeah.
With a game like Cyberpunk, the amount of content that they put into it is very big.
Yeah.
And that's very
Relevant.
costly. But
Yeah.
the question there is the content good?
And that's fine, and that's why I'm excited for the mod scene that they've announced, right? They're
Yeah.
opening the game up
Sure.
to modding, and I think that that's going to help a lot.
Yeah,
Cool.
it's maybe a good time to jump into gameplay.
Yeah. So
After
yeah.
segueing there.
So.
Yeah.
So now we finally got our hands on the game. We've talked about leading up to launch, but now we've finally gotten our hands on the game. What were we expecting going in, and what would you tell someone? I like to do the kind of, it's a mix of this and this. Like, so I do that all the time just because it's simple enough to kind of explain to people. So like I went into it expecting like I don't know, one of the gameplay trailers I saw made me think like Fallout, because like some of the shooting mechanics and like using abilities at the same time kind of felt very kind of Fallout to me. And then I was expecting a like Witcher level narrative, and so like, but what I ended up getting was like I didn't know how much GTA influence the game would have, which I was kind of surprised about, and then just like the RPG mechanic, like yeah, I haven't played Deus Ex, so I can't like say it feels like Deus Ex, which I assume will come up in the conversation. But yeah, I was just really surprised by the level of GTA I felt with the game.
I gotta jump in here. This is perfect. I was
Yeah.
I was expecting Deus Ex meets GTA,
Okay.
and it
And-
delivered.
And
I
and
mean,
that's
that's what it
exactly
was.
you were expecting that, and that's what you got. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not much to complain about as far. I mean, didn't think it'd be a world class story. I didn't think there would be a ton of like GTA. I was actually kind of surprised at how much of an open world they developed and then like didn't use. So we can kind of talk
Yeah.
later
Yes.
about the value of the development and sort of maybe the mismanagement of the choices of what was developed over 8 years. But yeah, it was pretty much what I thought it would be.
And that's what if you told someone like it's GTA meets like that's how you would explain to get other people involved. You'd be like, hey, if you like GTA and Deus Ex, this would be it. So what are the what are the Deus Ex aspect? Is it just Cyberpunk means Deus Ex or
No. It's sort of the I would say that at least the Deus Ex Human Revolution and it's not maybe not so much its predecessor, but maybe start with Human Revolution since that was like the bigger one of that the more recent titles. It's like RPG light, I would say. You're tossing skills into points into things to get better at doing more pistol damage or doing them or this, but it's very like it's light. There's not there aren't like major world like crazy mechanics. It's not like a hack and slashy Diablo kind of skill set where you're unlocking additional skills except for maybe some of like the cursory attacks, like you get like you might throw a big unlock into like knife hands or whatever, and then you can do knife hands at when you press F next to someone or whatever. But so that was sort of what I was expecting is a RPG light in a first person shooter sort of like structured environments where you're given a building, and it's got some hallways and some maze sort of layout, and you have an objective, and you've got to get through to the objective, and then there are several different enemies of different classes and types in the way, and depending on how you RPG light your character up, you have the choice of crawling through vents or stealthing around them or just killing them outright or whatever. And Cyberpunk delivered that in spades. It was exactly that as far as gameplay, and I would almost argue it was almost there was so much focus put on that, and that felt really polished, but there was so little focus put on the story that oftentimes I was like murder hoboing it across the city, and it didn't really matter what I was what the story was. I just knew I had to like kill a bunch of dudes to get to the end of the game. So.
Yep.
Yeah, I think I would have expected the game to be heavily influenced from Witcher because obviously same studio.
Yeah.
Knowing that it was first person instead of third person immediately makes me think of Skyrim.
Okay.
And I think there are a lot of parallels, right? Being able to walk into a room and there's just, there's, I'll call it loot, like everywhere that you can pick up. Almost all of it is trash.
Yep.
Skyrim's the exact same way. You can pick up virtually everything in a room in Skyrim, and it's all garbage. But the first person activities of it, I think a lot of that stuff just doesn't work.
Yeah.
A lot of the concerns of how Skyrim's combat is pretty one-dimensional.
Yep.
Especially like all the melee stuff. When you melee in this game, it's very one-dimensional.
Yes.
And it has a similar leveling up system. The more you use a particular skill, it levels up independently of your character, and then you put points into it.
Yeah.
But
yeah, I felt that. I felt that as well. Like the more I used my stealth, the stealth would go up, and then it would cap out. Yeah.
But I guess this may be a good place to point out, though, that the RPG mechanics of this game are very thin.
Yes. Yes.
Like it is. There are virtually no skills that you level up that actually provide new gameplay mechanics.
Yep.
When you put points and stuff, it's usually just a modifier of damage, or here's a point for 5% more reload speed, or your fire rate goes up when you kill somebody, or your headshot damage is more. none of those things change your game. Right? That doesn't give you any new abilities like a normal RPG would.
Yeah, there's no there's no like crux in the tree that means that like now I play this specific way.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of things like you can get a skill that lets you like throw a knife from stealth,
Yes.
but it also does virtually no damage. So who cares? I'll just shoot the guy.
Actually, I think that might sum up the game for me. Is who cares? I'll just shoot the guy.
Yeah.
I will say, did anyone try the combat hacking?
Yeah, I mean, I've used some of it, and
Yes.
it's got a couple of different skills that are interesting.
So having immersed myself in the pool of Cyberpunk offerings for the last better part of the decade because I have a problem. Cyberpunk, one of the things that I will die on a hill to defend it is that I think its combat hacking is some of the best that I've seen in a video. It felt to me, and I agree with the melee feeling one-dimensional and completely flat. I actually like noticed you have one finishing move that just kind of repeats over and over and over. If you have it, it feels bad.
Yeah.
Only like submachine guns and pistols kind of feel really good in Cyberpunk. The other guns don't really feel. I'm glad that they keep giving me a sniper rifle, but I'm in a metropolitan city. I don't need to be able to snipe people that frequently. It's not super helpful because the verticality in the maps aren't to the degree that lend itself to that.
It is odd because I did the big, like, I guess, what do they call it, Outlands or whatever. Like, I was out there doing Panam's story.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I used the sniper rifle a ton out there because it's wide open.
Yeah.
And you just feel like you broke the game because every single time you have to get into a fight, every shot is a one-shot kill.
And it's
no challenge.
It's weird because the drop off, like you said, it feels very flat for the combat, which is a problem because that game forces combat on you.
Yeah.
Not in a negative way, but you will do side missions that theoretically don't need to devolve into combat, but sometimes will devolve into combat for no apparent reason, right? And that goes back to why not just shoot a guy. Lethality and non-lethality have no actual effect on this game, and it blows my mind that they put so much development into offering those options that do.
It's a very strange mechanic in the game where when you down somebody, you think they're dead because you shot them, but they're not actually dead. If you walk up to them and shoot them when they are on the ground, then it actually gives you like the street cred or whatever for killing them.
Yep.
And that's why you double tap, ladies and gentlemen, every time.
Every time. Yep. Rule number 2, double tap.
Because there's actually a bunch of side missions where you have to take out like one of the psychos.
Yeah.
And most of the time I'd like headshot snipe them and they would die. And then I'd get on the phone to the fixer and be like, yeah, I captured them. And I'm like, wait a minute, I killed that guy, didn't I?
Yeah.
And it's because you don't actually kill anybody in the game when you actually down them.
Yeah, I did the whole, that was the only time I ever visited Wilson was when I had to go back and buy a freaking non-lethal mod for the new gun I got. Like that was, and I was like, oh, I'm making a choice to like be non-lethal this whole time. And then like the one time I like pull out a katana and like cut a guy in half, I'm like, oh crap, I actually just killed that guy rather than just like, using my non-lethal revolver or something like that. But
it is very strange when you use the melee weapons in particular, like the sword.
Yeah.
The skills that you get when you level it up are things like, when you lower stamina usage when you block.
Yeah.
Have you ever blocked anybody?
Only to counterattack in the boxing, when you have to do the fist fighting thing, when you counter, that's literally the only time.
Yeah, when you actually have a weapon in hand, you just run up and like swing it twice and they're dead.
Oh yeah, because I'll kill them way faster than they have a chance. Yeah, no,
and
absolutely.
So like it's as if they didn't balance anything in the game around actually having to fight people, because virtually everything is a 1 or 2 shot kill. Machine guns obviously have to hold down the trigger a little bit, but like it is not challenging at all.
No, yeah, you have
normal difficulty.
There is zero. In fact, and I can say this because I looked, because this is the type of person I am. They don't even have difficulty achievements, right? And I know how petty that sounds, but because they don't have difficulty achievements, there is actually fundamentally zero reason to play that game on any difficulty other than easy or normal. And
I played it on hard, but eventually, you're right. Like, well, because I know that I'm that type of gamer, and B, like I know that any game with even an RPG light system, eventually you just grind out level it, and then the game becomes easy anyway because it's an RPG. But I never I never had to like grind to get through a quest or anything like that. Like it was just all like shoot the guy and he goes away or whatever. But
Yeah, because the handicaps in that game, like the difficulties and obstacles, at a certain point would be ones that you would impose on yourself. Like if you
yes,
got rid of your ability to combat hack and replaced it with one of the two other options that they have.
yeah,
But you lose the ability to hack things, which
yeah,
is a big problem in Cyberpunk. That it feels like they didn't like design levels around the idea that like, oh, you can't hack anymore. That sucks.
cool. So okay, so I'm now I'm going to like it. You know, we've kind of been talking around kind of quests and kind of that stuff. I definitely want to start talking about kind of the actual spoilery parts of the game. Um, Especially the beginning. I think I talked to Josh about this kind of prior, but like, uh, I really liked the relationships, or at least like I do think some characters kind of felt one dimensional, but like I had a friend who was like really like Jackie hit home for me. Like he like I had a friend growing up who's just like this, people thought he was a big dumb oaf kind of thug, but like, he had a heart of gold kind of thing, and like so like the whole Jackie stuff was like hitting home for me, but it like right when I start to like him, or like at least give him any character depth, even more than like V has, like he's gone, and now I have to like deal with something else. So like yeah, but I do appreciate the kind of the RPG angles, and you know as far as like RPGs are concerned, the one thing I did super appreciate about this game is like the quests where you just sit there and talk, and it's like that meant like so much to me. All these RPGs are like go kill 12 mole rats and come back, and I'll give you some XP and some money. But like when I just sit there and talk, and like I can feel that my conversations are actually like going somewhere and making differences, making changes, like that's what I really liked. And like that puts the R back in RPG for me, of like I'm actually role playing right now, of like, should I tell this guy to go fuck off, or should I like should
Yeah.
I tell him to like, hey, maybe if you gave a shit about your partner, he won't kill himself or whatever.
I think one of the most there were a couple of missions that I ran into so far that you really did feel like you were investigating something,
Yeah,
and like what you found would lead to maybe a different result, or you'd handle it a different way. So I liked some of those missions that I ran into that really felt like that. But there was one in particular where it was like an ex-con that you run into, and he wants to pull you into some sort of, like, it seemed like a cult.
huh.
And I didn't like where it was going at all, and so I kept telling him, like, I don't want to be a part of this, and he's
I
like,
think
nah,
he's talking
nah,
about
just
Cinnamon.
yeah, Cinnamon. And he's just like, nah, come on, I'll explain more. And I'd go with him, and he'd explain some more, and I was like, nah, I don't like this. And it got to the point where I said I don't want to do this enough times that it was just mission failed, and that was it. I like, walked out of the house, and it was like that whatever that story was is gone now.
Yeah.
And I really liked that it let me decide, like, nope, I don't want to be a part of this,
Yeah.
because that makes me I'm making a character decision that whatever was behind that door, I'm
Didn't
not
want
going
to
to know
see it.
about it.
Yeah.
And I like that.
The story, honestly, the side missions, the story we can talk
Yeah.
about later, but the specifically the side missions and the characters are the reason that I will die defending Cyberpunk 2077. There are, like you said with Jackie, so like as someone who struggles with depression, there is a very very real moment in Cyberpunk that I won't talk about because it's spoilery, but
I
and
think
it's
we could. I'm thinking this is full spoilers, so I would
so
say
the
go
only
for
reason
it.
why I'm hesitant is because it's
Yeah.
technically side quest, right? It's not
Yeah.
mandatory for the full game,
Sure,
so
but I mean, we're eventually going to talk about the endings and stuff like that, so this is
that's
full
fair. Okay, well, this is
spoiler
your
stuff. Okay.
your warning,
Sure.
everyone. So Judy Alvarez, if you follow her side story stuff, very
Sure.
early on, after you rescue Evelyn, who is the woman who got you into this mess to begin with,
Sure.
she kills herself in Judy's apartment in her bathtub, and Judy
Yeah.
calls you to come pick it up, right? And the entirety of that submission is just you dealing with that situation,
Yeah.
and that is a phenomenal piece. It
Yeah.
is, it tells so much, it builds so much of the world. I love that piece and it is one of my favorite sequences that I've gone through in recent video game history. Right, same
Yeah.
with River Ward when you're rescuing his nephew.
His
Right,
nephew. Yep.
that is one of the most amazing missions that I've ever played in any RPG experience, right? And that's why I feel like Cyberpunk is worth it for certain things, right?
Yep.
That sequence alone, I would tell someone to play through the full first act of Cyberpunk 27 just for that mission sequence, right? Because of how well it's done.
Yep.
And then you run into other things in that game, you're just like, okay, but what? And you can see the parts where we were talking about earlier, people were very clearly passionate about working on these parts.
Yep.
But the problem with passionate people is that sometimes you need to rein them in. And I feel like
Yeah.
that is really what was missing from this project, is that no one was managing this project. This feels like a real passion piece, and then it feels like pieces where people were like, well, I guess we have to do this now, so we're going to do it. And no one was like, hey, stop making 1,000 websites for your in-game internet browser
Yes.
that no one is ever going to use.
Yeah.
And like, I get it, I understand, in the grand scheme of things, that's not a lot of dev time, but that's dev time that
Yeah.
didn't need to go to that.
Yep.
Yeah.
I think, when you look at the way the missions are structured, because, as soon as you kind of get to the title screen, right, which I know takes like
Yes.
8 hours, 10 hours, whatever.
Yeah.
When you actually get to that point and you're able to just kind of go anywhere, the game is too big, right? There's just
Sure.
too much stuff on your list of things to do.
Yep.
Because you start moving around, and every time you walk to a new borough, like, you get the fixer calling you out of thin air.
Yes.
Like, how do they know you're there? And they don't even know who you are.
Oh,
Bugs
yes.
at the total
We-
mess.
Yeah, and they just start giving you missions to do, right? But
Or cars to buy, because
Yes,
whatever
or
because why?
super annoying cars to buy, because you can
Yes.
just steal them whenever you need it.
Game devs, if you have a journal entry that is just cars to buy, rethink your system, because I've never been more annoyed than to have to scroll through 54 new journal entries and find out that they're all cars that I'm absolutely never going to buy. I don't care that you made an achievement to own all of them.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, you have the main missions, right? There's a couple that you choose from there. Then you actually have the real side missions with character story. Those are probably the most interesting thing in the game.
Yep.
But then you have a series of side jobs or
Gigs and
fixer
side
quests.
jobs,
Yeah.
yes.
And
Cyber
those
psychos,
quests are generally completely unnecessary trash.
Sure.
So-
it's just like stop a crime. It's like, okay, whatever. I'm gonna go like in and steal a laptop. Who cares?
And so this is, I have to interject only because I had this exact same thought while playing it, and I realized why this feels this way. It feels that way because all of those things, all of those useless side quests, the gigs, the cyber psychos and stuff like that, should be radial quests like Skyrim had. There is zero reason that I shouldn't be able to get infinite quests by calling up a fixer and asking for a procedurally generated job in Cyberpunk 2077, and it blows my mind that they spent 8 years developing this game and didn't think to create infinite missions. That would solve the problem of how cluttered the map feels, because you don't need almost all of those missions. You can just focus the icons on like the side missions, the stuff you can find in the world, and then you just have the fixers. It's another thing where like the fixers have physical presence. Whoever was in charge of implementing the fixers, I feel like didn't do their job.
Totally
proper.
missed the boat. Yep.
Yeah.
It was very strange the first time one called me. And then I realized that they were in my neighborhood, so I went over to see them in person. And then I realized, why did I do that? I can just call them on the phone from anywhere on the map whenever I feel like it.
Yes.
And they won't give me anything new.
Yep.
Exactly.
Right.
In fact, one of them doesn't have a map presence. Like Mr. Hands in Pacifico, you can't find on the map. He doesn't exist. And that irritates me, because I'm like, okay, so someone had the idea to not waste time developing physical models for these characters, but only implemented it once?
Yeah.
So I think I was talking to Casey a while ago about the game, and one of the things that I was saying to him was, it strikes me as very odd when you're walking around in this huge world that they've built, that I feel like there is virtually nothing that happens to me when I'm playing. I have to choose to do everything. So like gangs don't like chase me down, and like I haven't been attacked by anybody, without knowing that it's coming, because I'm basically initiating it. There's no emergent gameplay that comes out from any of the decisions that I've made so far.
I thought that some things. I thought that because of my relationship with like the cops and some of the cop missions I did, like I got some good credence with the cops, and so like I would be driving around, and like I think I don't know if it happened organically or if those were already on the map, but like the like defend the cops stuff, I thought that was kind of like a emergent kind of gameplay that would kind of happen. Or if I
Right,
like
but
committed a crime in front of some cops, they might brush it away
yeah,
because
I
I
mean,
had a relationship with
there's
them.
there's very minor stuff where
Yeah,
like there'll be like gangers just standing around, and if you walk too close to them, yeah, they'll attack you because they
sure.
don't like the look of you, whatever.
Yeah.
But
Yes.
I figured because they have the whole corpo street kid,
Yeah, we didn't even talk
like
about
setup.
which backgrounds everybody went.
Yeah, so I figure if you're a corpo, that street, you'd end up afoul of some of the gangs, and they would attack you periodically, and like there'd
Sure.
be that tension. There isn't.
Yeah.
If you're a street kid, and maybe the corporations would come after you for some reason. There isn't.
Yeah.
So everything that you do is I'm just deciding like, oh, I'm going to go intervene in this crime in progress.
Yeah.
I don't need to. There's no reason for me to do it, but I
Yeah,
can, so I will.
I think that's actually interesting that none of us brought up the Red Dead Redemption 2
I was
comparison
just gonna say that.
Yeah.
Another
like
8-year development game.
another 8-year
Yep.
development game. People were expecting a lot of it, whether or not it met, we don't have to go too much into it, but like I think part of it too was I was expecting like the side of the road events that you would get in Red Dead Redemption
Yes.
2.
Yes.
I thought I was expecting those to happen in Cyberpunk, and I
Yep.
don't think any of that kind of happened.
Correct.
And
Like you don't get just like waylaid by bandits, on the
Sure.
road.
Yes.
Like there is nothing that occurs like
Nothing
out
occurs
of
on the
your own
road.
control.
I mean, that's
So
another big.
Yeah.
to weigh in on this partially, because although I did not file Cyberpunk, I am friends with people who did religiously, and so they have vented to me about this already. Part of that was that originally street cred worked differently. So for
Okay.
those who don't realize, Cyberpunk has two leveling systems. They have an actual leveling system, and then they have street cred, which is functionally in the game another leveling system. What it was originally supposed to be was like a rep system. So the
Yes.
clothes you wear, the cars you drive, those types of things would weigh into your street cred, and that's how you'd get that emerging gameplay. They of course ripped that all out, which is
Yep.
why it feels weird. You can see it in the very beginning sequence, right? When you're driving home, when Jackie's driving you home after your first run, you get attacked by scavs. And it's jarring to think about that they've done that as a setup, as almost like a foreshadowing of, hey, this could happen to you in real life, so watch out. But it never
It
happens.
never happens.
Yeah.
Same with like Max Tech striking down, right? Like the idea that if you piss off enough people, Max Tech is just going to, and they're like the boogeyman. That never happens. And so it's this weird situation that I think comes, just natively from programming, where they just kept building on top of this thing without ever I don't think, as much as things got redone, I don't think it feels like they never fully scrubbed the project and started from scratch. They
Oh,
just
yeah.
kept trying to salvage what they had,
Yeah.
and it sounds like they honestly at the end of the day just suffered from like some cost fallacy.
Yes.
Yeah. And that leads to like this. So going back to the Red Dead Redemption 2 kind of stuff, like in Red Dead Redemption 2, like I felt like a cowboy and like kind of that stuff. Like did you feel the world was alive around you? And I think we got about this a little bit, but like the simulation aspects, I think, because I was arguing on like on a forum somewhere, like someone was saying, I really appreciated Red Dead where I could like follow someone who goes into town, and then like I could follow them doing their like daily activities, and I think there was actually some marketing stuff that said like 1,000 NPDs will go about their daily lives or something like that, and I think it's unrealistic to have expected every NPC in Cyberpunk to have had a daily life like simulated. But I also just like, maybe that's what people were expecting, and yeah, and like some of my immersion was broken when like I saw a video of a guy just like holding a gun pointed at someone in a car, and all they do is like like, and it's just like, and the whole system of like, don't walk around with your gun out because people might get like super crazy, and so like every time I like put my gun away, but as soon as I saw that video, I was just like, wait, do people not care that I'm walking around with my gun? Like if I just shot someone,
you can walk around with your guns out, and it really
Yeah.
doesn't matter at all.
Yeah, so like the simulation aspects definitely.
Yeah, I'd say
Yeah.
there's a lot of similarities between how Cyberpunk is kind of designed and how Red Dead Redemption is. Red Dead Redemption is, I think, deeper in terms of those individual systems. The fact that you can like sit down and play blackjack at the table, and then there's all
Yeah.
these like little mini games where you like
Yeah.
challenge people to shooting contests or whatever. There's a lot of systems in that game that make it feel like you're really in the West.
Yeah.
The problem is that game is a simulator, not a game. Like
Sure.
Red Dead Redemption is really actually a very thin game, deeply built simulator, but
Yeah.
weak game. And it really pisses me off that most reviewers gave it a 10 because it really isn't.
Yeah.
Cyberpunk, I think, is very similar. It's huge,
Yep.
but when it comes down to it, it's a lot of window dressing, and there's not much actual game in it. So if you're going to play it, you should be playing it to actually explore the story aspect of it.
Yeah.
Where there is some success in the product, but the game part of it, the systems are just, they're not good.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think
Go for it.
I think yeah, I mean that's summed up my Red Dead 2 experience. The whole game was like press F to play game.
Yep.
Like it leads you to a point. It says, put your character here. Okay, great. It starts a sequence. Now shoot this guy. Now walk to that place. Now pick up this item. Like it holds your hand the whole way. I might as well just have watched a cinematic. I feel Cyberpunk did a better job. Well, I mean, to Red Dead 2's credit, it did have a brilliant story, and I think that lends itself to having this linear gameplay where the player is essentially on rails, because you can tell a great story. You just have to do it in order, and you have to very strictly confine the player to the story. Whereas Cyberpunk was a lot looser in terms of what you could do in and out of order. I feel like there was a lot more emphasis put on side missions, and the side missions. I felt the side missions in Cyberpunk had a lot more depth and care to their development and sort of the world building and tying it in than Red Dead did. But the story, to me, the story in Cyberpunk was it was fun, but V was the most tropey, hollow character. I mean, I think
Any
Jackie,
man,
any man, like Jackie had, he was an any man without giving me any ability to actually make him my any man. As Skyrim, you can really invent yourself in the world, or for as old as that game is, but Cyberpunk V was just bland. He was the beige Volvo of characters, especially next to Jackie. He's such a fully fleshed out, interesting character.
That's very interesting, only because I have it lays into something that I've actually thought about Cyberpunk's overall characterization of V. Which beginning stories did you guys choose?
I was like Corpo, like background, or
yeah, which backgrounds did you guys choose?
I did Corpo.
Yeah.
I did Corpo as well.
Okay, so, and I can say this, I've done all of I've put too much time into Cyberpunk 2077. I've, for the record, done everything and you can do that game, just because at the end of the day, that's how much I love that game. But I would agree with the Corpo and the Street Rat. Their beginnings are not as strong, nor do they set up the characterization as well as the Nomad story does throughout the entirety of Cyberpunk. Having played it and having had options to do the specific background dialogues that are linked to being a Corpo or a Street Rat or a Nomad, and just the overall flow, Cyberpunk feels like it's designed for one story for V, and then they slapped on other things around it to try and make it work. But from choosing the Nomad start to getting the Pan Am ending, that sequence feels like the most authentic V. Like that, I cared about that V. That was characterization. Okay. That was where I really saw what they were going for. But having seen everything else, I totally agree. It's weird how shallow they feel.
Watching one of the Night City Wires or whatever like that, like they definitely, starting out in the desert and like that being your starting place, like definitely seemed like the part that would probably be the most fleshed out. I just chose Corpo because I wanted to, and like other than the subtle dialogue options, which I think ultimately landed up to nothing. The Nomad one actually would seem to like change the most things, but I would assume at the end of the day, like that whole sequence where like you're just hanging out on Jackie's couch would be the same regardless of background.
Yes, the segue once you get to the monologue and the title scene is the same, it's more of, and this goes to the storytelling aspect of it, right?
Yeah.
It's more of the way V is portrayed in that beginning and how to give you the full picture. So I went in with zero knowledge of the game other than like it's a cyberpunk game made by CD Projekt Red, right?
Sure.
I chose the Nomad story first and I kept playing it. So I when people ask me about my opinion, I always preface it with like, I think I probably played Cyberpunk 2077 the best way you could physically experience that game, with zero expectations, choosing the arbitrarily correct, like best defined. Like I lucked out, basically. It
Yeah.
never
Yep.
crashed on me. I had the
Yep.
best experience ever. There's
Yeah.
tons of asterisks near anything that I say about this game. But that being said, the nomad thing sets you up as an outsider. You immediately start dealing with like the not racism that people have towards nomads, like the
Yeah.
raider. um they really do a good job to ending that. Anytime you bring up your ex clan and how you can relate to Pan Am because she's going through stuff that you're also going through, so that relationship feels a lot
Mm,
stronger.
yeah.
When the nomads are all, accepting into you, again, feels way stronger because you've been exiled from your previous clan. You know how much this means. Those sequences just let build on top of themselves in a much better way than I think you have any options with either the Street Kid or the Corpo, just
Yeah.
because I know how the endings work out and they just don't lend
Yeah.
themselves to that type of authentic experience. Um,
So speaking of bugs, you cannot talk about Cyberpunk without talking about bugs. I know I'm representing the console. I played PS5 and I
Woof.
played it since the beginning of the game. Actually, the bugs eventually killed my gameplay for like 2 weeks, and I had to just sit here and wait for patches to be able to go through. I definitely had I definitely had like Delamain and someone else calling me all at the same time. I had a Johnny Silverhand line that was just every time I loaded in, he would just say this line and then it would be stuck on the screen. Um, uh, my crashing when I first started was hourly, and then by end of December it was like every 2 hours, and then when I finally finished it up, a week ago, it was like I might have had one in a 4 or 5 hour session. So like as far as and at least to PlayStation 5's credit, it would crash me to main screen, and then I would just load up my save, and it would take me like 2 minutes to get back in because SSD. But that is definitely not Cyberpunk's. That's definitely not Cyberpunk's glory. That's just that PS5 can load it up pretty quick. Um, but yeah, the so I don't know how it was on console or on PC, but that was my console experience of the game.
I would say on PC, I have very problems. Like, are there bugs? Absolutely. I haven't run into anything that's game breaking in my playthrough. There's some, texture clipping, some
Sure.
weird animations from certain people, that type of stuff.
Yeah.
Um, the one thing that really blows my mind is how abysmal driving is.
In what way?
I mean, I wouldn't
Yeah.
call it a bug per se, but like when you're driving a car, the steering like is really non-responsive and the brakes don't work.
Sure.
When I
Okay.
hit the brakes, the car doesn't stop. And
Yeah,
so I've actually switched to I only drive motorcycles now when I can, because
Yes.
the motorcycle at least has some degree of control. Like driving a car is awful. And I cannot believe that it went through QA and testing and all this stuff. And they were like, yep, this is good. This feels good. Like it is awful driving experience.
Hmm.
I'd say the bugs are they're sort of the least interesting thing about the drama that is Cyberpunk.
Oh,
Like
sure.
it's yeah, it was half baked, but the bugs, while for PC for me they were mostly cosmetic. Um, that's just time in the chair for QA and the devs
Sure.
to spend more time. It really what was boggling was the lack of development in some areas, like you guys said, the overdevelopment in other areas without any payoffs, just like the number of half-baked systems that you were relying on developments in other areas to come into play and that never did, so they felt
Yeah.
like they never came into any true form and therefore had no reason to be developed in the first place. That just goes full circle to now they've released some modding tools. I think there is this incredible rich or I should say, incredibly ripe world or like platform to develop onto because they have spent a ton of time to build this
Yeah.
super intricate city. And I think the world building behind that and the amount of time that went into set dressing all of that really feels like that might have been one of the most polished and developed things that came out of this game. And even though the simulations within don't really hold up to that level of development, those can be patched in later. People can develop on top of those. So there's a lot of
Yeah.
hope that this game will become more than it was on release.
Yeah.
But
Yeah,
yeah.
I definitely have the crew of friends who are like, oh wait, I'll give it 6 months for for the exterminators to kill all the bugs and to be able to actually
Yeah,
like
well,
enjoy the
yeah.
experience. Yeah.
It won't
The
be a
big-
better game without bugs though. Like
the big
Yeah.
problem you run
That's
into
the
is
problem.
yes,
Yeah.
when you fix the bugs, the game still has too many systems that are weak.
Yeah. Yeah, I was sitting here when we were talking about like systems and stuff like that. I was trying to count how many times and what I felt about like the brain dance system and like how many times I did it. And I think I did it like half a dozen times. So it was like interesting enough, but eventually it just turned into like me cycling through different senses and then just like, getting the clip or whatever I was supposed to find in the room. Like
Yeah, you just look for the clip on the bar and go straight to it, get it,
yeah.
and leave.
Yeah, like I don't know that I ever had an experience like a like mind bending
okay, I feel.
brains. Yeah.
Because that's not it's not a primary system. Like it's to me, I loved brain dances because it reminded me of Remember Me, which is it had one of my favorites. So Remember Me is another Cyberpunk game that takes place
Yeah.
in Cyberpunk Paris in like 2083 or something like that. But it has a very fun mechanic where you go into people's memories and you can rewrite them. And it's very similar to brain dancing. And so when brain dancing first popped up, I was very excited for it.
Yeah.
And I would agree, right? You only do it about half a dozen times, but I feel like having replayed, and more importantly, you don't have an option to skip those sequences in future
Yeah.
playthroughs,
Sure.
and it sucks. It
Yeah.
is not good.
Yeah.
The brain dance sequence, the first time you go through it, is a novel and fun experience, and I totally see after doing it 6 times, you're like, great, I'm done with this, and that's why I think there are 6 of them.
Yeah.
Having to go back and do some of them, it's the most obnoxious thing ever. You fast forward, it's a solid like 5 minutes of your life you just never get back.
I mean, it is part of what makes some of the missions really cool is like the investigation aspects, and so
Yeah.
being able to brain dance somebody and like really look around the area and discover some cool stuff, it's rewarding. That the first couple of times you do it, but then they start to just be tedious because you get stuck in the sequence, and they're a few minutes long, and you have to
Yeah.
rewind them and watch them again for a different clue, and it's like, all right, I've had enough of that.
Yeah.
But overall, that is one of the things where I'm like, I think that is an example of a perfectly fine gimmick, right? Like
Yeah.
Sure.
that it doesn't overstay its welcome. It serves its purpose. It's fun. It's novel. And does it have some flaws? Yeah. But
Yeah.
that's what I get from replaying the game 30 times, right? Like
Yeah.
Yeah,
yeah.
but it also
anything
it
could
gives you
scale.
good narrative, and it is very true to the world and the technology that's in Cyberpunk, right?
100%.
Yeah,
Perfect
totally.
perfect segue to I don't know much about Cyberpunk. I like George said, I've had some experience with like Shadowrun and all that kind of stuff, but like I would think that no cyberpunk setting would be complete without like existential quandaries or like what does it mean to be human or like what does my humanity mean. So I don't know that I ever like questioned my humanity at any point until like some of the Johnny Silverhands where especially as we're getting towards the end and it's like I am you, you are me. We both have the same shared experience over the course of this gameplay. Like, are you sure you are who you say you are? And like, that's why I took the Johnny Silverhand approach of like, fuck you, get out of my head, as opposed to like, let's all be one. Like, I was very much antagonistic to Johnny Silverhand because I was just like, get the fuck out of my head. I don't even like you. You're a dirtbag. So like, that was probably the only time where I started thinking like, well, am I Johnny Silverhand? Is Johnny Silverhand me? Who is what and how do we get here? But otherwise, like, I mean, I'd have to question some of the physics of if my entire skin was metal, what would life be like? But other than that, I was like, I didn't really question my humanity in any kind of serious way, which I think would be another thing that kind of misses the whole Cyberpunk setting.
Well, there is, in Shadowrun at least, there's the whole mechanic around
Yeah.
when you put in cyberware, you lose humanity basically,
And
Yeah.
that
and
is
you can
just
only bear so much of it before you die.
yes, and that's a
Uh,
staple of Cyberpunk, that nature of replacing meat with metal and losing a
sure,
bit of what makes you human. That is an
but
overall trope of
it,
Cyberpunk.
it is very strange. Some of the guys you meet in the game are like so mechanical,
Yes.
and it doesn't seem to really make any difference. I
Yeah,
guess that's the whole point of the psychos, right? The cyber psycho.
I
You
mean,
know,
it's why I don't think Cyberpunk 2077, funnily enough, is a good Cyberpunk game.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
it doesn't.
Yeah.
The purpose, the quote unquote, if you're going to give a purpose to Cyberpunk, is generally to explore transhumanism, to explore class divide, right? That's the punk nature of it.
Yeah, I think the
And
class divide piece is the very interesting thing with the corpos and the street kids, and I don't feel like they utilized it in the story enough for me.
they don't. And what's funny is that the anti-corporate person who you're supposed to relate with on that level is Johnny Silverhand, and he's portrayed as a complete and total unlikable character the entire
Yeah.
duration of that
Yeah.
game.
Yeah.
So
Like a
you are not supposed to like him.
Well, I mean, he's a terrorist, is what they describe him as repeatedly.
yeah, and
and
very much lives up to that moniker. Like
Right,
and
yeah.
and that's the problem with them, and why it's not a cyberpunk game, is that they villainize the class divide so that there is no class divide. You're rooting for the corporation because the terrorist is taking over your head, right? So like naturally you end up having to root for the other guy because you're just kind of in this weird situation.
Yeah.
And it just doesn't really, the closest they get, I feel like, to any sort of cyberpunk stuff is the stuff that they did with the AI. But I
yeah.
I can only assume that they're going to do DLC
I mean, that
because
would be the
Yes.
plan, yeah.
Yeah.
but
But-
what's weird is that there are storylines that I feel like they have to, or they intentionally did the way that they did for strictly DLC, and it kind of bothers me. We were talking about it earlier, but I don't have a problem with designing a game to have slots to plug in DLC. It bothers me when it's so jarring to the story that immediately cuts off, and specifically like the Peralez one, right? Like that side quest abruptly ends
Hmm.
and
Yes.
nothing ever comes of it. And
Yeah, it was very odd because you think that that's like a bigger event, and then they
Yeah.
just leave.
Yep.
They just don't talk to us anymore. It's like, what?
yeah, and there's so much like that in that game
Yeah.
that just kind of abruptly cuts off, where you're just like, okay, and I can kind of see if your play is, well, we're going to come back to this in DLC. That's okay, but then we need to do a better job of disguising that hole, right? Because
Well,
then
also the assumption is that they're going to. They might not.
yeah, I suffered Mass Effect Andromeda syndrome, so I
Yeah.
understand that
Yeah.
world.
Yeah. So, I think we're kind of talking about kind of getting towards the end. And we want to talk endings. I don't know if George, you want to drop off here or stick around. We don't have to take too much time talking about the endings. There are several different paths you could go. I experienced two of them, pretty rapid fire. So just leaving that open, George. If you
Yeah, it's fine. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm not hugely invested in the
Sure.
story, at this point. Well, I just haven't finished the game yet because obviously it's got a lot of issues, so I haven't
Yeah.
really been playing it heavily.
Yeah. When I got to the roof, I was like, what was going on here? And like all of a sudden, your character throws the pills off the roof, and I was like, what am I experiencing? And all of a sudden, it's like the only way to get out of this is to take myself out of the equation. And then it just does the like slow fade out, and then here's gunshot, and then credits start rolling, and I was just like, whoa, like that's technically an option for a way that you could end this game. And I was like, wow, that was kind of impressive. I mean, I eventually went around and like, I think there, I don't know if there's just the three choices, but I was like, oh, I'm gonna side with the corpo side of things. But yeah, I was just like, wow, I got credits to roll technically, but I went back and did like the corporate route and the Arasaka route. Although it seems like there might have been other options. So I don't know what you guys' ending experiences were like.
I got the Pan Am ending where
Okay.
you decide to live your last 3 months in the real world and just fade off into the sunset, and it has the kind of does have that Western ending where you
So Is that because you chose like Pan Am to help you raid the Arasaka Tower?
I'm not sure. I
Or
haven't played it enough
okay,
times to know like
okay,
what triggered
Yes.
that. But
okay,
Yes.
yeah, I went that route, and then
okay,
I developed the Pan Am relationship, which like unfortunately, like choosing Corpo, all that kind of feels pretty shoehorned in and a little hollow.
yeah,
The Corpo route, and I can't speak to the other ones, but the Corpo route, you're I wanted to play out my being sort of like an evil piece of shit, a
yeah,
la Blade Runner style, and then within you know by the end of the first act, I guess you're a street rat now, and
yeah,
you're the corpo bit was the all you really experienced was like walking out of a building and taking a flying car, which you can't do the whole rest of the game, and
yeah,
and then like montage cut to you're on the streets with Jackie, who's
yeah,
like who's as far from corpo as you can get. And so
yeah,
like the whole Pan Am story, when you're starting from that, it sort of feels like you just you click the right dialogue,
yeah,
and then now you're in a relationship, and then you click some more things, and they're helping you save the world, and
yep.
you guys met like last week.
Well, that's what kind of like upset me is like, okay, I chose the corporate route just because like I'm glad they had the like option of like, hey, when I'm finally talking to Pan Am after the whole thing during like the falling action, it was like, hey, I didn't want to put you in danger. It's like, okay, that's exactly what I was thinking when I didn't call Pan Am to help me raid the Arasaka Tower. Um, but like then I get to choose whether or not I want to live, or if I want to just like live out the rest of my days on Earth, or out. And I was like expecting there to be, because I had already done all the Pan Am stuff. I was expecting there to be like an option for me to like go back and like live out the rest of my days, and I would get something special of like, hey, you and Pan Am spend the last of your days together. Like even just a box would have been sufficient for me, but it was just like, yep, you go back and that's it. And then credits roll, and then like the whole like each character gets shown and stuff like that. It felt very, I don't know, I always think I like Fallout in that, but they did it very succinctly in this. But like I was expecting to get something special for like, hey, I have this relationship with Pan Am, and she's just like, hey V, I'm leaving you a message because it's the ending credits, and even though we have this week long relationship, like Josh said, like nothing really happened. It's like I would have probably gotten this regardless of my relationship with Pan Am. So I just felt like kind of let down on that last bit, which kind of sucks.
So there are, just so you know for the record, technically 7 endings.
Okay.
Because each of the 3 that you're aware of has 2.
Okay.
And then there is a secret ending, which is the ending
Sure.
that you actually wanted, because we had the exact same experience. Because I also was like, I'm not going to endanger any of my friends who I really care about, so I'm just going to throw these pills off and kill myself, because like
Okay.
that's the only option. There is a 4th option. I won't talk about it because it's convoluted and dumb. But
Sure.
the 4th option is the option that you want.
Okay.
Given your instinctual gut choice, if you had to go back, and if it would be the option that you would have chosen.
Okay.
But overall, again, the Nomad one is honestly the best ending, because I've done not all 7, but I've done and seen the big 3 ones, right? Like the
Sure.
differences between siding with Arasaka, Nomad, or Johnny's route.
Yeah.
And honestly, I like the Arasaka one because it feels the most cyberpunk, funnily enough.
Okay.
But I think the Nomad one fits the best.
Okay.
And just the Johnny one is if you want to go out with a bang, right? Like
Yeah.
the endings, I always think back to, whenever I have the experience of any ending of any video game, I always think back to Mass Effect 3. Because
Sure.
of
That's
the nature.
Because
unfortunate.
of, yes.
So, and what's funny is that I've always had the stance of like, I don't mind Mass Effect 3 because I enjoyed Mass Effect 1 and 2 so much that like the last 5 minutes of Mass Effect 3, while I get people were upset about it, didn't bother me that much. But I look at something like Cyberpunk, right? And the endings, exactly like you were saying, don't fundamentally feel satisfying
Yeah.
in a way. My time in the game was building up to this ending, right? That's the entire experience that you're playing a video game, and the endings don't quite tie that up in a way that I felt as satisfying. Honestly, it wasn't until the credits were rolling and I had the calls from people that I felt satisfied, because I was like, oh, I remember when I would,
Yeah.
River Song and I did, or River Ward and I did this stuff and blah 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 blah
Yeah.
blah, and like
Yes.
that was satisfying to me. That was the closure I was looking for. But the overall story of V and Johnny is not super interesting in the grand scope of things.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is some of that because you have invested time as your version of V, and you're not given, like, it's really hard to create a linear story in an open world where you're trying to make
Yeah.
your own decisions and your own feeling for what your character wants to do, and then if you're not given an option to do what you think you should do, like, that's really frustrating.
Yeah, and part of it, to pull it back slightly, is the way that they went about designing this game from a cyberpunk standpoint, right? Cyberpunk has a spectrum. Most people, when they think about cyberpunk, they think about like Blade Runner, right? Like the
Yeah.
the, the dark, gritty. Whereas Cyberpunk 2077, its source material, the tabletop role-playing book, is actually what I refer to as pink mohawk, right? It's over the top,
Yes.
it's zany, it's the explosive, and they capture that in moments in Cyberpunk 2077. But they also try and capture those dark moments of like Blade Runner-esque stuff, because they know that that's what people are going to really be looking for.
Yeah.
And the problem is, there's a reason why most people separate those two into distinct buckets. They undermine each other on a very real level. So like the Arasaka ending feels the most Blade Runner cyberpunk out of all the endings, whereas all the other endings feel like they're Cyberpunk 2077, Pink Mohawk, guns blazing endings, right? Because they're leaning into that. And I think it's just it's another symptom of, I think they tried to do too much without any sort of like actual direction.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt you guys, but I have to bolt. Work
Yeah.
calls.
Okay.
Crunch
No
time
problem.
is real.
No, I think we were just gonna finish up. I don't know if you got 2 minutes to kind of say what the good stuff was, what the bad stuff was. Just kind of.
I might have 2 minutes, but
Cool.
I got a supervisor breathing down my neck.
Okay, no problem.
The here, short and long, good stuff. The world, or I should say, the buildings, the set dressing, the design and world building that went into the physical world, not the mechanics and the simulation on top of that, but all of that provides an incredible platform for modding and for building more content into,
Yep.
even like an entire story into. I think that there's a lot of promise there. And then of course, in a nutshell, the cons, or like the drawbacks, were there was so much unmet potential, and something we really didn't touch on as much as we probably could have is the marketing was all over the place, and might have even just outright lied to what the game was ultimately. It completely oversold the game, and yeah, it was a shame, because there was something really cool there. There was a lot of potential there, and that's anytime something is kind of overhyped or oversold, and then expectations are dashed, then it sort of becomes this in this case like an infamous clusterfuck. So,
Yep. Well,
yeah.
cool. Yeah. Thanks, Josh. Yeah, we can jump in. Anybody else got with their list
Absolutely,
of?
guys. All right, peace.
Thank you. Their list of good stuff, bad stuff? Anything different? Anything similar stuff?
I mean, I'm very excited. I walked away, credits rolled, of Cyberpunk 27, and I said, I'm super excited for the sequel to this game.
That was I was gonna talk. I was gonna talk about future DLCs. There's definitely plenty of real estate for that.
It's to echo, what Josh was just saying. They built a terrific sandbox. Crappy sandcastle. Terrific sandbox. Super excited for the platform that they built. Super excited to see what they do with this in the future. This is a very good, to me, first step into this IP. I
Yeah.
hope that given all of the negativity surrounding its release, it doesn't discourage them from making a second one.
Yeah.
But I do think, unfortunately, it's one of those situations where I don't know how excited I am for DLC as opposed to just a sequel to the game.
Mm.
I think that there's some fundamental issues with this game on a very structural level that are just not fixable anymore. Driving is one of them, right?
Yep.
And I don't even mean that just from like player driving. The actual They don't have a driving AI. The cars are on a grid. And for
Yeah.
a game like Cyberpunk that is a GTA adjacent, it's insane to me how robotic those cars feel. And if the answer is, well, humans aren't driving those cars, then my immediate question is, then why can V drive her car, right, or his car? Like,
Yeah.
that. So people have to be driving those cars, and it just doesn't. It's one of those things that takes out of the game. So
Yeah.
I'm excited for them to do a full other game,
Mm.
mostly because that's when I think we'll see substantial mechanical improvements. I would
Yeah.
hate for them to try and put mechanical improvements in a DLC. I think that's a recipe for disaster that's just
Yeah.
not gonna work out. I think they can do
Yeah.
story DLCs, that's fine, but
Yeah, and I think that's what the way they will go is kind of those story DLCs, and story DLCs, next gen kind of stuff. Like I think that'll be kind of good enough for now. But yeah, I think the good stuff are the good stuff is the side quests. The bad stuff is the anything but the side quests. No, I think yeah, I think there was a lot of hesitation around kind of the shooting mechanics, and I enjoyed them from time to time. Combat was fun. Eventually I just turned into a murder hobo just like everyone else. So that didn't have much weight to it.
Yeah, I guess I'd say, I mean, good stuff in the game, obviously world missions, side missions,
Yeah,
really good. The problem is the bad. As an RPG, um, I don't feel like you get new choices to really make your character feel any different, because it doesn't matter if you have a handgun or a shotgun or an AR. Like those are major trees within your leveling up,
yeah,
and they're irrelevant choices.
yep,
Um, some of the stuff like cool. You get a bunch of bonuses after you kill an enemy, and for like 10 seconds you're super buffed.
yeah,
But fights, there might only be 3 people to fight
yeah,
in a room, and so it's like those bonuses don't even matter. So like there's just a
yeah,
lot of stuff in that RPG leveling engine that just don't do anything, and that's
yeah,
really, when you're designing games, making false choices is really, really bad game design.
yeah,
Um, yeah, driving is horrible, and I cannot believe they released the game with driving that bad.
yeah. I was actually
Uh,
I was talk when I was playing through. I was talking about like Uber exists in our world.
yep.
I wanted to see rather than fast travel, if I had the ability to just like Uber to something while I'm like looking through my freaking menu or whatever, like that would have been super immersive and like I would have enjoyed the crap out of that. And it's like,
Yeah, I mean,
yeah,
there are certain aspects of the game that do
yeah,
that. Like when you're with some of the story missions, like they'll
yes,
be driving the car for you, and you
and
can
then you
just be
just
like looking
talk,
around,
yeah,
whatever. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
But
So I
yeah, I mean,
appreciate
just
that.
there is fast travel, but
Yeah,
obviously in a game that's open world like that, you want to be exploring. So
yes,
generally, driving around is the way to go.
yep,
But driving's terrible.
yes,
Um, the crafting system in the game
yep.
makes very little sense
And you have to
to
spec into
me.
it like
Yes,
an entire
yes,
thing that you have to just kind of spec into. And I didn't even
yep,
understand like turning a gun into the higher rarity versus just
yep.
upgrading it. Like I had no
And
idea
like,
what that whole system
yeah,
was.
getting the higher upgrade materials so you can actually make something that's higher tier. Like it was
Yes.
very difficult to get enough of like that rarity,
Yeah.
at least at the start.
Yeah.
But yeah, the fact that you have to spec into crafting, and then the crafting like isn't really, because like the rarities of the weapons don't even matter. Like
Yeah.
my blue sniper rifle can already one shot people, so why do I need a purple one or an orange one? Like
Yeah.
it was, again, bad system.
Yeah.
Um, there's some other systems in the game, just stuff like using grenades. I rarely ever use them because they aren't necessary.
Yeah.
Stealth is fine, except most of the time you screw something up and end up killing everybody in the building anyway.
Yep. Yeah.
And there is
yeah.
like virtual, like you don't even fail missions for. They'll be like, oh yeah, I wanted you to go in quiet and you didn't.
Shucks.
Slap on the hand, but like
Yeah.
nothing happens.
Yeah.
So there really wasn't enough consequence for some of that
Yeah.
stuff. And I guess the other thing I would say is, like, for me, the difference between Corpo and Street Kid and Nomad was really not very apparent in the ways that I guess I expected it to be.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, you have different dialogue options, but that doesn't. Obviously, it sounds like the ending is related to that, but
Potentially.
I expected throughout the game to be experiencing totally different segments based on what path I was.
Yeah.
Right.
Or
Yeah.
things would be exclusive if I chose one
Yeah.
thing and not the other.
And
Well,
that,
like you should get corporate missions or you should get street gang missions, and they shouldn't be available to types because that's not who you are.
Yeah. What were you saying,
yeah,
Matt?
and there's none of that. Oh, I was just going to say, just to clarify, it's not so much that the Nomad background references specifically, it's just the nature of what I would say is good storytelling, right?
Yeah.
The
Sure.
Nomad background coupled with the Nomad ending is the strongest coherent story from start to end.
Yep.
Yeah.
And the moment that you start swapping those out is when you're like, well, this doesn't feel good at all.
Yeah.
Um,
Did we do your goods and bads, Matt?
I mean, we've heard enough of it from me, but the only other thing is that quick hacking, that is probably my favorite mechanic thing that they managed. And the only reason why is by the time you finish that, if you dump all your points into it, it feels the best to just hack a camera from across the street from a building and systematically kill everyone in that building and then just waltz past their bodies to your objective.
Sure.
So if you really want that specific feeling to live that power fantasy, perfect game for that.
Well, what's interesting about that is it's basically magic.
Yes, 100%. That is 100% just magic.
Yeah. Because if you think of the skill trees, right, you've got one tree that is heavy weapons and blunt weapons, and then you've got another one that's the small arms, rifles, and sharp weapons.
Yes.
You've got stealth.
Yep.
You've got cool.
Yep.
You've got crafting.
Mm-hmm.
Right? None of those things really provide very different game mechanics. So it's the hacking tree or intelligence that actually gives you access to quote magic.
I don't know.
It feels different.
In my stealth tree, whenever like they would see me out of the corner of their eye and then time would stop down, I felt like a freaking wizard because I was just like, I could run at someone in that time jump and then just like crush their windpipe.
Well, there's similar stuff in just like I used handguns a lot, and like when you dodge with a handgun in your hand, once you get the skill, time slows down so you can aim and shoot while dodging.
Yeah.
But like that stuff, it's not enough. But I guess the whole point is the game is not really an action game.
Yeah.
And it's sort of a weird mix because there's obviously so much stuff invested in leveling up so your action is better.
Yeah.
But it's still a very weak system. And this is the same problem I had with Skyrim, right? Skyrim is an amazing exploration game, but the combat sucks. And I think that's just the nature of it. It's not a straight up first person shooter, but the shooter aspect, that's not what the game is. It's a story based exploration game.
Yeah. Well, cool. I'm gonna round it out there. You guys don't have to go anywhere, but I'm gonna say goodbye and put a bookend on this, and then we can keep talking and all that kind of stuff. So be right back.
Mm-hmm.
What up, viewers? That is the end of episode 1 of the Friend Zone, where we were talking about Cyberpunk. We got into a lot of things. Cyberpunk definitely has its beginning and its end, but just wanted to talk through all of it. This is definitely not the whole conversation. I didn't really want to end these with like a grade or anything like that, but you've heard from a lot of us about what Cyberpunk is, and what are some of the good things and some of the bad things. So hope you enjoy this. Let me know. We're gonna record these kind of once a month. So in the comment section, I might leave what next month's game is, and looking forward to making more of these. So let me know what you think down in the comments below. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoy this content. If you do, follow, like, and subscribe to me on YouTube and Twitch so you can see more great content like this. I hope you have a super day. I hope you have a super weekend. And I hope you have a super day. Bye.